Hi there. I'm standing here in my office next to this big map. I just love maps. I've always been fascinated with maps because I like traveling and I like adventure, I like learning, and I love missions. And so one of the reasons I have this map is because I want to remember places I've traveled to. I've been to over 40 countries and plan to go to more. And I want to think about missions that we have, and I want to pray for those mission projects. You know, we have a church right here in Mexico City called Grace Place, and we're going to be talking to you more down the road about what we're doing there. We have a church and child development center right here in Ecuador that we've built and that we're helping through sponsorships and mission trips. We purchased right over here in Ukraine, right down in here, a transition house for orphans who have transitioned out of the orphanage and they want to be in a safe environment, Christian-based environment. And when we traveled here to adopt our daughter 8 years ago, Selena and I were able to go down and do a dedication for that house that we had raised the money for. And so just looking at the map, there's so much to learn. And I was thinking about where we are in Revelation. We're talking about the fall of Babylon in Revelation chapter 17 all the way into the first part of chapter 19. And Babylon is a metaphor, and yet it reminds us of the rise and fall of nations. I mean, you think back through civilizations, there's many that were at one time very powerful and they're not so important anymore. For example, you know, Egypt right here was controlling the whole region at one time. And you go to Egypt today and you know, there's a lot going on there, but it's not controlling much. In fact, the economy really struggles there. It's very dangerous. I've been there. You can go see the pyramids, but you better be careful. When we went there, our guide, who was in the bus with us all the time, was also our security, and he had a machine gun. I guess we had another guide, but we had a security guy with a machine gun under his sports coat, and we had a police escort wherever we went in the bus. It is not the safest place. And so Egypt's not what it used to be. Neither is Assyria, which was a very strong controlling power at one time. And of course, then there was Babylon. And right here is Baghdad, and the ruins of Babylon are very close to Baghdad. But Babylon used to control this whole region through here, and they were powerful. And then along came the Persians. Iran used to be called Persia, and they joined with the Medes, and they overcame Babylon, and they extended the empire a little farther. And then Alexander the Great came from Greece, and he extended it all the way into here. And then after Greece came Rome, and Rome's a city that's been rebuilt. You can visit today. It's one of my favorite places on earth because there's history around every corner. But that empire was unbelievable. It included all of Europe, all of northern Africa, and way down here, right to the edge of India. All of this was a mighty powerful empire. But Rome no longer controls the then known world, that's for sure. They fell in 400 something, and there's still a city of Rome and a country of Italy, but not an empire. These empires, they come and they go. And you look down through history, you see so many examples of that. It always baffles me that England, for example, look how small that is. They controlled a huge part of the world at one time. You know, a big bunch of Africa, India, portions of Indonesia and other Asian countries here, and little portions of they controlled They controlled all of Canada at one time and parts of the United States. And then you think of Spain, and it controlled at one time half of the United States, all of Central America, more than half of South America. And this little teeny country right here, Portugal, they had colonies all over the place. They're still speaking Portuguese in Brazil because that was a colony of Portugal. And even little Holland here, the Netherlands, there it is, it's tiny. And they had quite a few different territories in Africa, most of Indonesia. Australia, of course, was under the British government as well. So there have been incredible illustrations in history of the domination of a culture, values, and political system of one small place that was able to just dominate so much of the world. It baffles me. And of course, in our modern times, most of us remember the fall of the Soviet Union. So, after Hitler and Stalin and Japan tried to control the world for a while, all this whole region during World War II. But then, the Soviet Union was Eastern Europe and all of this massive amount of territory here. And, it was very strong for several decades, but in the early 90s, that whole thing collapsed. So we've seen over history these rise and fall of nations, the adopting of the values of that system, and for the most part, it hasn't been a good thing. It could be argued that England took Christ to a lot of these nations because there were a lot of Christian missionaries that were sent out and so forth, but for the most part, this domination has been negative. Now today, you think about what is the representation of ancient Babylon for us? For the first century Christians reading Revelation, they thought of Rome when they heard Babylon is fallen. And they looked forward to the defeat of the Roman Empire because of the persecution that was happening with the Christians. I've got a quotation that I want to read for you here that is, I think, helpful. It's from a little book called Breaking the Code, Understanding the Book of Revelation. Babylon is allegorical of the idolatry that any nation commits when it elevates material abundance, military prowess, technological sophistication, imperial grandeur, racial pride, and any other glorification of the creature over the Creator. That was a full sentence there, but it's talking about how we can reapply this principle of Babylon in any culture if we see that kind of stuff going on, where instead of worshiping the true Creator God, we're worshiping other things. And that brings me over here to this wonderful country. I'm so glad to be an American because I've traveled enough to know that this is a unique country and there's many wonderful blessings associated with being an American. On the other hand, we need to be careful of getting sucked into some of the values that have developed in this country. Because as I look at Revelation chapter 17 and 18, I find three specific values of Babylon that God brings judgment on and that he does not want to see his people get indoctrinated with. So think about these three. First, there's this value of money and possessions. You can really see it right there in the heart of chapter 18, how luxurious Babylon was and how they mourned the fall of losing all of that luxury. Well, as Americans, we also are very fixated on materialism, on monies and possessions. And there's nothing wrong with money and possessions. We all need some and we all want some, and it's okay as long as that doesn't become our focus and actually absorbs all of our attention and becomes like part of our worship when we're obsessed with it. And then secondly, there was this idea in Babylon that human life was expendable, and the martyrs are being killed for their faith, and slaves are being killed in Rome in the gladiators in the Colosseum and so on, and there's a lot of innocent blood that's being shed in that culture. In fact, in Rome and Greece, they would just take babies they didn't want and leave them somewhere for the wild animals or for somebody else to find and make a slave out of them. And I don't want to start an argument in these groups, okay, but we've got some big problems here in America with this whole idea too of not valuing life, and that includes life in the womb, the unborn. You know what's going on in our culture. And then the third thing that was going on there was a worship of false gods. They wanted you to worship the gods of Greece or of Rome or the emperor himself. And yet there's more to it than that. It was the gods of pleasure and the gods of power and the gods of prosperity and good crops and all kinds of different gods that were being worshipped. And when we're honest about it, if we look around at our culture, there are a lot of idols that are also alluring to us. And they're really the same idols. They just present different in every culture. And so in your discussion, I want you to think a little bit about not only how does the fall of Babylon and the sins of Babylon apply to the Roman Empire that was persecuting the Christians, But as we reapply these principles, what can we as Americans, who are even in middle class Americans, are rich compared to most of the rest of the world? It's just the reality. And sometimes we can be then, because of that, kind of numb to the needs of the rest of the world. So go through this and think about applications, not just for first century Christians, but for us today. God bless you. And watch this little drawing that will better bring you into our chapters for study this time.
Now, John has fully unpacked the message of the Lamb's unsealed scroll. And now he goes back to expand on 3 key themes that he's introduced earlier: the fall of Babylon, the final battle to defeat evil, and the arrival of the New Jerusalem. And each one of these explores the final coming of God's kingdom from a different angle. So first, the fall of Babylon. An angel shows John a stunning woman who's dressed like a queen, but she's drunk with the blood of the martyrs and of all innocent people. She's riding the dragon beast from the sign visions. It's a symbol of the rebellious nations. And she's called Babylon, the prostitute. Now, the detailed symbols of this vision, they would be very clear to John's first readers. He's personifying the military and economic power of the Roman Empire, but he's also doing more. In this vision, John has blended together words and images from every single Old Testament passage about the downfall of ancient Babylon, Tyre, and Edom. John's showing how Rome is simply the newest version of the Old Testament archetype of humanity in rebellion against God. They come together and form nations that exalt their own economic and military security into a false god. This isn't something limited to the past or the future. It's a portrait of the human condition throughout history. And Babylons will come and go, leading up to the day when Jesus returns to replace Babylon with his kingdom. But how will Jesus' kingdom come?